It's herd mentality, which means you control what gets discussed today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on YouTube, your first watch every day. As a reminder, Locked On Bills is free and available on all platforms. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you take control of our discussion by sending in questions, comments, takes, whatever you have regarding the Bills, and I respond to them here today. I've got a loaded set of questions to get to, so let's get right into it. First one today comes from Mac. Mac says, there's been talks this offseason about the value of our offensive line pieces and if we should look to move on from some players. Do you see any scenario where all members of our offensive line from last season remain on the roster? If not, whom are you most willing to part with? Going into last season, it was discussed that the Bills never played a snap with their preferred offensive line of Dawkins, Feliciano, Morse, Ford, and Williams. Yet by the end of the last season, only two members of the preseason preferred list remained a starter and or in the place we expected them to start. I'm hesitant to move on from guys from that group because A, having quality depth at offensive line is a luxury, and B, as we've seen the past two seasons, the guys starting week 1 have not been the guys starting late in the season. And he mentioned week 16 and 17, even if the presumed starters are healthy in week 1. Just want to know your thoughts on what this offensive line room is going to look like next year. Really good question here from Mac. And so I'll give you my thoughts on some of the specific moves that I think will happen with the offensive line in the offseason. I think the Bills will move on from John Feliciano. I think Ike Bacher will not be re-signed. And I think Darrell Williams is only back at a reduced contract. And so Feliciano out, Bacher not re-signed. Williams is back if he'll agree to a pay cut. I think Ryan Bates is re-signed as a restricted free agent. I think you can expect some of the Aaron Cromer guys to be added. Players like Austin Blythe, Joseph Noteboom, and Austin Corbett. I think a couple of those, maybe two of those three would be added. I think Mitch Morse is back at center. And I would not dismiss Cody Ford in your conversations about players that will have an opportunity to start next year. So that's what I think the makeup of this offensive line will look like. Maybe a draft pick at some point. If there's really good value early, I can see that happening. But, you know, I would expect one of the draft picks to be an offensive lineman, but not necessarily in the mix to be a starter. The next one comes from Justin. Justin says, after the combine and the 40 times, what players do you feel are out of the Bills' reach? I've heard your guy, Devontae Wyatt, might go in the top 20. How has the combine changed the Bills' first-round targets? Well, yeah, I think that there's some of my targets that are no longer in play, one of them being Devontae Wyatt, who, I mean, I guess if you just watch his tape, you realize that he's that type of athlete, but the combine certainly showcased it, and he's one of my favorite defensive tackles in this class, and I don't know that he gets to 25. I think that more of the wide receivers are in play. I feel as good as ever that Jameson Williams can be there at 25, especially with how all of these wide receivers seem to test so well. I think that's going to help them move into the first-round conversation, and teams may be less than willing to wait on Jameson Williams to recover from his injury. I'm willing to wait. I am absolutely willing to wait, so I think he's got a better chance of being in the mix. When it comes to cornerbacks, I think Tariq Woolen out of Texas San Antonio is a player that's at least worth mentioning. But where I really want to go in terms of answering this question is, yesterday on the podcast, I referred to a list of 14 players that my brother text messaged over to me and said, hey, I think these 14 guys are all off the board by the time the Bills pick at 25. And so I agreed with that list, and so let me share this with you. And so I think these are names that you can probably cross off the list as potential Buffalo Bills. And again, these aren't necessarily players that are at positions of need, but I think that at least these 14 players will be off the board. Now, the question is, what are the next 9, right? That's really where it gets interesting. But right now, I think firmly you can say, and don't pay attention to the order of this list. That doesn't matter. This is just a list of guys I expect to be off the board at 14 at this point, or the 14 guys I expect to be off the board at this point. Malik Willis, Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, Trayvon Walker, Jermaine Johnson, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Ikemi Kwanu, Evan Neal, Charles Cross, Trevor Penning, Sauce Gardner, Kyle Hamilton, and Garrett Wilson. I think all of those guys will be gone, and I would stop romanticizing over any of them if you are hopeful that they will be a Buffalo Bill. Chris says, I was listening to Frank Reich on One Bills Live, and one of the questions was about Marlon Mack. I was wondering, what are your thoughts? Should the Bills have interest? Can he add something different? And so Marlon Mack, former Indianapolis Colts running back, given that they have Jonathan Taylor, and of course they've also paid Nyheim Hines, I think we can all expect that Marlon Mack is going to play football somewhere else in 2022. And so as far as my thoughts on him being a Bills target, I think he's just okay. I didn't love him coming out of South Florida. I know he had 2 1,000-yard seasons for the Colts, but has never been much of a factor in the passing game, both as a receiver or a pass blocker. I think he's a decent between the tackles runner, not much of a perimeter threat. And he hasn't had any meaningful production over the last 2 seasons as he's been working back from the Achilles injury. And I'm just overall lukewarm on Marlon Mack. I think he's a rotational back at best. I don't think he really elevates the Bills situation at running back. And, with the 2,000-yard seasons under his belt, maybe he thinks he's earned a reasonable contract, and I wouldn't sign him for more than anything but a minimum type deal. The next one is from Kevin, and Kevin says, for a herd mentality hypothetical, the Bills trade down with the Lions to 32 and take Travis Jones, a defensive tackle out of UConn. What does your end of the first day podcast sound like? This guy is a tank and looks like a difference maker up front. Disclaimer, Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt are gone at this point. I think this is a fun question that I want to dig into, and I want to reference a tweet from Merck. I don't know if you guys follow Merck on Twitter, but I do, and he has good Bills tweets, and he has good draft tweets. I really enjoy him, and it's at Merck, MERK 256. He actually tweeted the other day about a trade down from 25 and giving an idea of what it would look like, and this is a trade that went from 25 to 31. And so this is what he said: looking for a trade down baseline. The most recent example was in 2020. Minnesota traded a first, 25, to San Francisco in exchange for 31, 117, and 176. So 1, a 4, and a 5. And I think that's a really good framework for us to consider that type of a move, which is exactly what you presented here with moving back from 25 to 32 to get Travis Jones. So Travis Jones, I'm a big fan, 6'4", 325, 34 1/4 inch arms, 10 1/4 inch hands, ran 4.92 at 325 pounds. I know that's nothing like Jordan Davis, but my gosh, that's still really impressive. 28.5 inch vertical jump, 4.58 short shuttle, and a 7.33 3-cone. Let me give you my summary on Travis Jones for my scouting report to give you an idea of what I think about him as a player. I said Travis Jones had offers from Boston College, Temple, Rutgers, and Buffalo, but chose to stay close to home and play his college football at UConn, where he developed into a highly regarded team leader. Jones arrived on campus at 360 pounds with 30% body fat, but has since dropped 30 pounds and reduced his body fat percentage to 13%. While Jones profiles best to a one-technique nose tackle role that provides most of his value on running downs, he is a terrific athlete for his size and has found ways to apply consistent pressure on the quarterback despite all of the challenging dynamics to consider with the UConn defense. Jones is a stout run defender that frequently resets the line of scrimmage and is unselfish in how he takes on blocks, eats space, and keeps the second level clean. He's a strong processor against the run that is rarely out of his fit. As a pass rusher, Jones is an excellent pocket pusher that has active hands and the ability to power through rush angles. There are plenty of reasons to believe that under better circumstances and given his unique physical skill set and body transformation, that he will be an even better pro than college player. He should immediately make an NFL run defense better and make the unit more stout. Pretty glowing review, right? And I said a couple weeks ago, I'm not exactly sure that Travis Jones isn't a better prospect than Jordan Davis. And so if you're telling me that the Bills can move from 25 to 32, pick up an extra 4 and a 5, and what's interesting about the 4 and the 5 is I think it gives you the ammunition that you need to move up in the second and the third round. I'm not advocating for the Bills making 11 draft picks. We know that that's not really a realistic plan. As much as I would love to have all the young players, they're not going to get rostered, and they're going to get plucked off the practice squad. So having an extra 4 and 5 in your back pocket to move up the board in the second and third round or move back into day 2, I love that. And so I think I can get really behind this idea overall that Kevin has presented. And obviously Travis Jones, I think, fills a major need. And I've identified defensive tackle as what I think is the primary need for this football team. And a player just like Travis Jones is kind of what I'm looking for. Football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds. They even have Vegas casino games. So head to the website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, let's keep it moving here. The next one comes from John, and he says, if you're Brandon Beane, would you consider trading for Drew Lock to back up Josh Allen? He only has a $2.2 million cap in the last year of his rookie deal, and the Broncos would probably be happy to get a 6th or a 7th rounder for him. I don't think you'll find a free agent backup as physically gifted as Lock for that low of a price. Or would you prefer going the safer route with a more experienced game manager like Tyrod Taylor or Teddy Bridgewater if it meant paying a little more? Well, first of all, I think backup quarterback is one of the top needs for this team. We've talked about that. I'd love to get Ryan Fitzpatrick. And in Joe Biscalia's article that he did for The Athletic, where he did a Bills mock offseason, he had the Bills signing Ryan Fitzpatrick for 1 year, $3 million. So first of all, sign me up for that. If that can't happen, then I think this is a reasonable idea, trading a late day 3 pick for Drew Lock. Like you said, the cap figure is manageable. He's obviously got a little bit of upside there. And I think it could be a rehab opportunity to a much smaller degree as a Mitchell Trubisky, because Drew hasn't had success like Mitch has had in the NFL, and he's not nearly as gifted in terms of processing and decision-making. So there's some level of interest that I would have in this idea if Ryan Fitzpatrick fell through, or, if Tyrod Taylor or Teddy Bridgewater could be had for $2 or $3 million, I'd probably rather have them for Drew Lock, because let's be honest, Drew Lock's only a 1-year thing. And so if you're going with a 1-year thing, I want the most appealing 1-year thing at the best value. So Fitz at 3 or Teddy Bridgewater at 3 compared to Drew at 2.2, I like that better. But there is a path where I could get behind this. Matthew says, hey, Joe, who do you think is the better fit in the slot, Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson? I'm with you. I'd love Jamison Williams, but was just curious. I like a wide receiver that can play inside or outside, make the wide receiver group more versatile. With Beasley, we knew he was going to be in the slot when he was on the field. It would be nice to be able to move Diggs around if we had a slot that could do both. So I like both players there, both the Ohio State receivers and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. They're actually separated on my personal draft board by a half point. Chris Olave is the much better deep threat and outside player. I think he's a really good vertical receiver. Might be the best vertical receiver in this class, not named Jamison Williams. The problem with Chris Olave, and this is kind of a crazy thing that's missing from his skill set, he's not a very good yards after catch guy. 4.3 speed, great route runner, not a great yards after catch guy. Wilson is the guy that is a better slot receiver in my mind, and he's way better after the catch. Now, I don't think Garrett Wilson is as good as Chris Olave in terms of vertical route running, but if you're looking for the more yards after catch, the guy who's better with yards after catch that has a little bit more inside outside versatility, I probably like Garrett Wilson. If you want the burner to play on the outside, well, then I think Chris Olave is your guy. But they're really close for me. I think the better fit for the Bills in terms of what they need is probably Garrett Wilson, but I don't know that he answers your question in terms of having a burner. So it's complicated, but Garrett Wilson would be my pick, and they're different players. They bring different things to the table. Andy says, what would you like to see Buffalo get in return for Cole Beasley in a trade? I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure you can reasonably expect more than a 6th-round pick. A 33-year-old slot receiver that he's on the market. It's well known that he's available. I mean, I go back to some of those trades in the past, like Anquan Bolden and Calais Campbell. Some of these trades that get done for veterans like this, it's late round stuff. And so a 6th or 7th-round pick would be probably the most you can expect in return. Andy had a follow-up about Jeremy Ruckert, Ohio State tight end. He said, is Ruckert a good fit for Buffalo? And if so, what round would you feel comfortable taking him? And he referenced a tweet from John Scott, who said Long Island native and Ohio State tight end Jeremy Ruckert just referred to the Bills as the only team in New York. Now, I really like Jeremy Ruckert. I think he's going to be a better pro than college player. You see really good route running. You see good hands. He's got good size. I think he's probably a 3rd or a 4th-round guy. And so I think if the Bills wanted to get him, that would be a 3rd or a 4th-round pick. And probably if you're thinking the 4th round, you probably have to trade up a little bit. And he'd be a good player. It's just how important do you feel like that tight end 2 spot is outside of, Dawson Knox, and certainly Tommy Sweeney is not on a good trajectory right now. So the Bills need more at tight end. I would like Jeremy Ruckert, but I kind of like a veteran in that tight end 2 role more than anything, to be honest with you. Crass War says a major topic of the Bills' 2021 season was the inability of the offense to make teams pay for playing a lot of too high or other heavy coverage sets on defense. As we head into free agency and then the draft, I was wondering if you could apply that lens to potential additions at wide receiver and or tight end. Making the necessary improvements at O-line or running back, of course, will help, but for the wide receiver and tight end positions, I feel it is a question of what type of player they add. The reason for the question is that my current draft crush for the Bills is Jameson Williams at 25. That said, I wonder if the ability for the offense to make the best use of his talents could be limited in terms of if teams continue to play us as they did in 2021. Do you think that this angle could or should come into play for the Bills when adding to their offensive weaponry? If so, what players might you favor if viewed through that lens? So I think the best thing that the Bills can do at wide receiver and tight end to help overcome too high safety looks or other heavy coverage sets is yards after catch. Now, that goes without saying that being able to run the football would help even more. Having that ability to run the football against light boxes was a problem for this team last year and the year before. And I'm hoping that Aaron Cromer's influence on this football team will help the Bills' run game from a design perspective and help the Bills' run block better with his coaching techniques that are very unique. So that's number one. But number two is having better yards after catch players. Having guys that you can get the football to in the quick game and they can create for themselves. So I'd be thinking a lot about yards after catch. Now, Jameson Williams is really good at yards after catch. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. So not only can he stress the defense vertically and lift coverage, he's really good with the ball in his hands. So I think that's what's great about Jameson is that he's not limited in terms of, he's just a vertical down the field guy, because this guy is amazing with the ball in his hands. So I think having another receiver, to go with Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs that gives speed and yards after catch would be huge for exactly solving this problem that the Bills and so many other teams faced in 2021. Clay says, how will the wide receiver combine numbers affect Jameson Williams' draft stock? Could someone jump him and he be available at 25 because of it? I'm guessing I'm asking is, can Jameson Williams realistically be there at 25 after all the great combine numbers put up by other receivers. So I think that all of those other receivers performing well really helps this possibility, and the fact that he's injured. Everything that I've heard is that he's on track with the recovery, but when I watch the tape, I don't see a better receiver in this class than Jameson Williams. I don't. So I think the first round receivers at this point would be some combination of Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, Drake London is in play from USC, not for the Bills, but in general. Chris Olave, Jahan Dotson, and Christian Watson and Treylon Burks. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys that I would not be surprised goes in the first round. And you have a ton of day 2 players. A lot of day 2 receivers that are interesting. And so when I think about the depth of this class and the fact that there's a lot of hype around a lot of other players, and Jameson Williams won't test before the combine and is coming off of an ACL tear, I think the chances of Jameson Williams being at 25 is as good as they could possibly be. Maybe last week I would have said, no, I don't know. I don't think he gets there. I think there's a chance now. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX, and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and right in your pocket. Save time and save money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure you write Locked On in their "How did you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. They have amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. All right, next one today comes from Billy, who says, who would you rather have for the Bills 2022 team? And he gives me 3 different either-ors. Would I rather have Christian Watson in the second round or Calvin Austin the third in the third round? I would rather have Christian Watson in the second round. I think he's similarly explosive but bigger, and so I'll take that. Would I rather have Harrison Phillips for 3 years, $16.5 million, or Levi Wallace at 3 years, $24 million? I would rather have Harrison Phillips. I think that the path to finding an answer at CB2 is surprisingly easier for me to identify than having a good one tech to play next to Ed Oliver. And there's certainly draft picks and there's certainly veterans that the Bills could sign, but I like the value of that contract as well. And then would I rather trade a 4th round pick for either Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey? That is very, very easy for me. Christian McCaffrey, I'd rather have him for sure, because the money there is pretty similar. With either player, you're not really locked in for anything past this season. And I think Christian McCaffrey is a player that I have a bit more confidence in. And I mean, Saquon, over the last 2 years, he's really not been effective. And last year, I thought Devontae Booker was the better Giants running back last year. So I'll take my chances with McCaffrey if I have to. Next one comes from Suburban Driving, who says, why is John Mechie III, the wide receiver from Alabama, never mentioned as a target? I noticed him a lot before he was hurt. Would he be a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round possibility? Yeah, I like John Mechie a lot. I think he's a 2nd round guy. I don't think he'll be available in the 3rd or 4th round. If he is, that'd be great value. Obviously, just like Jameson Williams, he's an Alabama receiver coming off of an ACL tear. Here's the thing about John Mechie, and just kind of set aside the fact that he's injured. I love everything about John Mechie except for his ability at the catch point. He's a guy that whenever there's traffic or contact that he has to fight through at the catch point, he just kind of struggles. Now, good news for him is that he's a good route runner that creates a lot of separation, and that's really helpful. But sometimes those windows are a little bit tighter in the NFL, and I think that he's going to have some issues. If he's not open and he has to have challenge catch points, he struggled in college a lot. And so I like him. I like everything about him except for his ability at the catch point. I think with him, you have to understand that you're gonna have to live with some drops. And if you're comfortable with that, then he'd be a great pick in the second round. The next one comes from Drew, and Drew says, my friends were discussing, and we have a running back solution. Pay Deonta Foreman around $2 million. He just finished a 1-year, $900,000 deal living in Derrick Henry's shadow, and draft Dameon Pierce from Florida. Zach Moss is not on the team, and Singletary battles for his job. Your thoughts? Drew and your friends, this is exactly what I'm talking about at running back. I think you find a appealing veteran like Deonta Foreman, who should come in a bargain type deal. You draft somebody in the middle rounds, and you have them compete, right, with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, and somebody gets cut. And your top three backs are the veteran, and Deonta Foreman's a player that interests me, Devin Singletary, and your draft pick. Unless Zach Moss beats him out, which I got to be honest with you, I have my doubts will happen. Next one comes from Alec, who says, listening back to Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane's combine press conferences, and what stands out to me is the heaps of praise they put on Mitch Trubisky. Besides Mitch just being a good guy, it seems like they're trying to pump up his value for a better compensatory pick. Could you explain how the compensatory pick formula works and if we are in a good position to get one? Yeah, so they did say some nice things about Mitch Trubisky. Brandon Beane said he's a marry your daughter type guy. Well, Mitch is married, and him and his wife are expecting a baby. So if you were hoping that Mitch would marry your daughter, I think you can throw that out the window. But, yeah, a lot of good praise for Mitch. And, you know, Mitch is a player. I know you want to talk compensatory formula, but let me say something before I get there. Mitch Trubisky had a reasonable career and had a reasonable amount of success with the Chicago Bears. And we spend so much time talking about how the environment is so important for a quarterback to reach their ceiling. The play caller, the coaching, the offensive line, the weapons, the run game. Did Mitch Trubisky have any of that with the Bears? Could you realistically look at any point in Trubisky's time with Chicago and say, you know what, had a great coach? Well, his coach in year one got fired, and then Matt Nagy came in, and he's now fired. Their offensive line has been below average. Their run game has been below average, and the receivers have been below average. Did you really think that this was going to be the environment to showcase for Mitch to showcase himself the best? No. And so I'm rooting for Mitch because this guy, it wasn't his fault that he was a number 2 pick and that Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson were picked after him. It's also not his fault that his team did a very poor job of building around him. 2 head coaches that he played for there, both fired. The GM fired. The talent wasn't good enough. The coaching wasn't good enough. The situation wasn't good enough for any quarterback to find success. So I'm rooting for Mitch too. I think he needed to do exactly what he did. Step away from it, be part of a good infrastructure, and get a better opportunity next time around where he gets to pick. And now if it doesn't work out next time around, then it is what it is. But if you're going to dismiss Mitch Trubisky for the rest of his career because of what happened in Chicago, I'd say that you're making a short-sighted claim that does not consider enough context. So anyways, your question was about the compensatory formula and if the Bills are in position to get one of those. Let me give you a definition here from an article that I found on NFL.com about compensatory picks because it's complicated and this kind of summarizes it very well. I want to give them credit because these are not my words. It said to qualify for compensatory picks, teams must end up with more or better qualifying free agents lost than gained in a particular year. Teams are awarded compensatory draft picks between rounds 3 and 7 based upon a formula that takes into account a player's average salary per year, snap count, and postseason awards. So there you go. That's how they do it. I think the practical application to the Bills. Okay, if you want if you want the Bills to have compensatory picks, which keep in mind, they won't be awarded this year. Anything that they gain this year would come for next year's draft. If you want compensatory picks, you need to root for the Bills to not re-sign their own players that are unrestricted free agents and for them to get paid and go be super successful next year with their new team, and for the Bills to not be active in terms of signing unrestricted free agents. So the fact that the Bills could be looking at departing players like that are, again, it has to be unrestricted free agents. It can't be players that you cut. So Mitchell Trubisky, Isaiah McKenzie, Harrison Phillips, Levi Wallace, Mario Addison, Jerry Hughes, Emmanuel Sanders. If you want a comp pick, you want for other teams to sign them to big deals, for them to perform well, and for the Bills to not really sign any unrestricted free agents. That's going to be the path to compensatory picks for the Bills and for every team, but specifically those players for the Buffalo Bills. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I hope that you enjoyed today's herd mentality. So many great questions have been submitted, and I try to get to as many as I can. I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to yours this time around. Tomorrow, we turn our attention to free agency. We're going to preview the offensive side of the ball and talk about players that I would like for the Bills to consider and guys that I just think are good targets for Buffalo. And then the next day, we're going to do defense. And then Friday is our mock offseason. I'm going to go through. I'm going to be Brandon Bean. I'm going to call the shots, and I'm going to put this thing together and walk you through the players I would cut, players I would sign, a mock draft, and then finally a 53-man roster projection. So a fun week ahead the rest of the way here on Locked On Bills. Make sure you don't miss it. Make sure that you are subscribed, and would love it if you took a second to share and rate and review the podcast. All that stuff is so helpful. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.